For most Black Americans, especially those in the South, the front porch isn't just part of the entry into the house. It is the place we enter community. It's not just the comfort or safety we experience there, but it's where we do some people watching and good reflection. On the front porch is where we tell the truth with a little sweetener and an awesome time along the way. We take what we learn and we act. On this episode, we discuss all things related to youth, education, community, and the politics of people.
Welcome back, y'all. Hey, good people. This is KaCey, and this is the official first episode. So I wanted to jump right into it, but y'all, all that's happening in our country, for as much as I try my best to plan what I'd like to say to you all, stuff just be happening. Life just continues to go on, and not always in a good way. And so even on this past week or whatnot, there were a couple of incidents that made me stop and scratch my head. And, I'm just still confused about how someone who is armed and has now shot and killed people can be apprehended without incident, is what they call it, right? Without incident. But yet, Black teenagers, Black youth, boys and girls, men and women, are still shot and gunned down. There was an incident in Chicago with an unarmed Black teen who literally had his hands up when shot by the police officer. Then we had the incident, that happened in Highland Park, where folks were literally mowed down, attending a parade. And it's just unfortunate. It is unfortunate that we're still having this conversation in the year of our Lord 2022. I'm not going to sit here and profess to know all the answers, nor have I researched enough to have a effective conversation about that. And so I want to kind of transition a little bit, because we're always in the back of our mind, and I use we loosely. Some of us in the back of our minds are always trying to figure out, how do we fix this? How do we change this? And folks have their own method to the madness. It can start with making sure that our Black boys and now our Black girls know how to, quote unquote, properly engage law enforcement if ever they are stopped, knowing their rights. And especially since the Supreme Court has handed down that officers don't have to read you your Miranda rights anymore. They don't have to remind you of your rights when they place you under arrest. And so now more than ever, we need to know what our rights are, because we cannot use as an excuse anymore, well, I didn't know my rights because they didn't read them to me. They're not doing that anymore. And so understanding or helping our young people and some older folks know what they do have a right to as a citizen in this country. And all of our young people are not ready to have the conversation about how do you positively and effectively engage law enforcement, because there's still so much trauma there. And that trauma finds itself in a lot of different situations. I don't think that the answer to solving this epidemic of our own in our community around police brutality and cop killings and all of that lies solely around just better education. definitely education helps in terms of, what are our rights and how do we more effectively engage with law enforcement and those in that sphere of authority. And there's education that has to be had on that side as well. Getting back to community policing, getting back to understanding that you should be a part of this ecosystem and not coming and standing on the fringes or on the fray, hoping for the best. But even with that, there's still a lot of work to do in our communities. There's a lot of work that has to be even just chipped away at to ensure that this generation coming up behind us is in a better position to answer the questions that society is posing, to them almost daily. And I'll be honest with you all, it's a lot. It's layered. I intentionally live where I live in Atlanta. And I feel like I got the best of both worlds right now. And what I mean by that is that some folks drive past my house and still very much think that I live in the hood. Other people drive past my house and they see it as a gentrifying neighborhood, right? Which it is. Some people see potential. Some people see, oh, that's long gone, right? There's no reviving that. And I get to see how being someone who is educated and civically involved and can read a room, can articulate both requests and demands, how we're very close to a change and still so far away from it all at the same time. It is 2022. And the organization that I am so fortunate to help co-lead works to really help solve for some of these challenges and these problems with our young people. And it's not just around community and law enforcement, but it's also, around school and education and making sure that they have those tools in order to create a life that will be of high quality for them. But it's really hard because a lot of times what happens is that young people, especially Black boys, are criminalized for being poor. They are not given the same opportunities because they live in poverty. They are immediately summed up that they're going to be more difficult to work with when they're in classrooms or in group settings. And a lot of times, those assumptions are made subconsciously, right? Even for the person who is pro-youth, pro-Black, pro-community, there are times where still in the back of your mind, you may think, oh, what is really going to happen in this setting? And being able to push through that bias that you have in order to serve our young people. And I think about that and I say that as we are already preparing to go back to school here in Atlanta, school starts the very first week of August, and there's already back to school bashes and festivals that are being planned and scheduled. And I think about some of my boys and them having to go back into classrooms and still living in very impoverished communities, neighborhoods, streets. I have some young men who literally there's no lights, there's no water in their home, and having to help meet some of those needs for him and his family. And then wondering, what is school going to look like for him if we can't do for him every day during the school year what we've been able to do during the summer? Buffy Smith wrote in kind of this anthology called The Poverty in Education Reader, A Call for Equity in Many Voices, that what she does is she suggests that students should be rewarded for the qualities that they bring to school, that they learn living in poverty. So many times what we do is we try to quote unquote beat poverty out of our young people, right? We try our best to say, hey, we try our best to instill qualities that we think would cancel out what they have learned living in poverty. Because a lot of times we focus on those so-called negative things, right? Those things that are like little pesky gnats around your ear on a hot day, and you wish they wouldn't do that. You wish they wouldn't sound like that. You wish they wouldn't respond like that. And we fail to focus on the positive qualities that they learn. Some of those qualities that Buffy Smith lists are perseverance, compassion, flexibility, patience, and creativity, right? Just to name a few. She goes on to say that, and just like I mentioned, that they're generally punished because of what has cultivated their personalities through cultural norms that they've developed, right? Which are the attitudes, some of their preferences, mannerisms, and abilities that don't always align, right? Always align with the prescribed system that we have deemed appropriate for young people to engage in order for them to be looked at as successful or have the potential to be contributing members of society. And I say this a lot. For those of you who don't know, I ran for office in November of 2021. And I really ran on the platform of wraparound services and understanding fully that children don't get the luxury of checking their stuff at the door. They bring that stuff with them to the classroom. Like, if you think about it as an adult, right? Well, you don't have to think. Let me tell you about me. Right? Most people in my life know that when KaCey gets to the place where she is hungry, right? Not like, oh, I could eat, but hungry, either haven't eaten all day, just whatever it is. I am not the most pleasant person to be around. Literally, I am 41, and there are times where my mother still knows through the phone that I have not eaten anything because of the tone in my voice, the attitude that I have, how short I am in my responses. And she will sometimes tell me, go eat something and then call me back, right? I remember even being a teenager and I'd be in the mall with my cousin and my cousins would be like, let's go find a food court, right? Because KaCey is hungry. So if as an adult, right, I still have a hard time checking my attitude when I am hungry because I am annoyed and agitated and uncomfortable, then what do you expect a young person to do who does not have a fully developed brain until the age of 25 per scientific reports? What are they supposed to do with all of the stuff that literally rests on their shoulders that they did not ask for? Because some of the stuff that I deal with that's really hard for me to check is self-inflicted as an adult because of poor decision making, right? And so I have to learn how to navigate poor choices and the consequences thereof. But again, those are choices that I had the opportunity to make as an adult, and I have to own them. There's some things that our children are forced to own that they did not make that choice for. So why should it be their consequence to carry? Right? And so if that is the case, why is it that we think that when they cross that magic threshold of a school building, that they're supposed to forget that they are hungry, clothes haven't been washed, mama and the boyfriend been fighting for the last 3 days, somebody done pulled a weapon on one or the other, they don't know where the older brother or sibling is, great grandmama, not grandmama, but great grandmama is trying to raise 6 kids, right? They're sleeping 5 to a bed. Shoes don't fit properly. Clothes don't fit properly. They're walking to school passing bullet shell casings and paraphernalia from drug use and used condoms. And some of the boys would tell you even taking a walk around the community with me last summer, we literally saw folks having intercourse on the street on a major thoroughfare in Atlanta in broad daylight, and they did not care. Our children deal with a lot of this every single day in certain parts of our communities. And for adults to assume and to think, oh, well, figure it out, get in my classroom, sit still, pay attention. When you come in with an attitude because your man didn't treat you right, your woman did you wrong, you didn't get what you wanted, you're upset and you're mad, and you are a grown, fully functioning adult who can't get your stuff together, but yet we want our children to ignore all that other stuff that they have to deal with when they get to school and then pay attention, right? Like, I mean, it just doesn't make good sense to me, right? And so the thing is that we have to understand that they're coming to school every day with their daily lived experiences, and they don't get to shrug that off, because there's nowhere to put it. And a lot of times there's no solutions that they have in order to fix it, or to at least be able to say, you know what, for a little bit, I'm going to lay this down. And so that alone, y'all, can make it really hard to break free and out of poverty. Here in Atlanta, it's a sad statistic, but it's one that a lot of us know, is that in Atlanta, if you are born in poverty, there is only a 4% chance that you're going to make it out of poverty if you're born in poverty in Atlanta. That is sad, because I think it is a whole nother episode all on its own around the wealth that is in Atlanta. And the fact that there's only a 4% chance that if you are born in poverty, you're going to make it out of poverty in this city. Like, that is mind blowing to me. It is crazy to think that the percentage to make it out of poverty in this city is only 4%, with the amount of wealth, with the number of Fortune 100 and 500 companies that call Atlanta home for their headquarters. Right? We have a school system that has an astronomical budget, especially in relation to the number of students that they serve. And for our children to still have a 4% chance to move out of poverty, right? Still crazy to me that Atlanta is like 1 or 2, depending on the month and the year that you talk about it, with the wealth inequality gap in this country. Which means if you're rich, you're getting richer. And if you're poor, you're definitely getting poor. And for those of us who are holding on for dear life in the middle, we're going 1 or 2 ways. And most of us are heading towards the poverty piece, and not the let me get my wealth and get richer either. And then there are new reports and new studies that have come out, right, that talk about how Atlanta is inequitable in housing, and that people can't find housing to live in that is safe, right? That, allows for them to build wealth, for them to really understand how to have a base, because they have to move a lot. Between like the AJC here in Atlanta, I think it was back in February, they released an article that talks about how the housing shortage is just shedding a light on the affordability problems, even in Atlanta suburbs, and how it's carrying over to the suburbs in Atlanta because folks cannot find a place to live within the city. Like, literally, there are 1-bedroom apartments in certain parts of the city that are going well over $2,000 a month, but yet wages and salaries aren't increasing. And so if you think about that in relation to families and to community members who were already making just minimum wage, and if their wages aren't going up, but yet the cost of living is going up, then we're beginning to see more and more challenges and issues crop up and pop up in the lives of our young people, because their families really didn't have a chance to begin with. And that's a little heartbreaking, right? It's a little heartbreaking. And that definitely impacts their ability to be successful in school. So when we look at these experiences as a source of how poverty impacts academic achievement, what we also have to understand is that we have to start including those lived experiences really in the curriculum and how we work with students, how we really contribute to their well-being. The effects of poverty in education, especially in our public schools, is important for us to keep a light on, because we still have to find a way forward, because that is where most of our Black students graduate from school, right? Most of our students are not in private schools. And we can have this debate around public schools, traditional public schools, and public charter schools, and all of that. The reality is that more traditional public schools are still graduating more Black students. And so we have to make sure that we understand how, again, their daily lived experiences are playing a part in what those graduation rates are looking like and the success rate of our students, whether they go on to a 4-year institution or 2-year technical college, or they enter right into the workforce. Whether they graduate and how they graduate is going to make a big difference, right? So I just think it's super important for us to remember that and to just shed light on it, because we have to find a solution, y'all. We absolutely have to find a solution, because if not, we're going to see more students who are dropping out of school. We're going to see more students who are not going to be able to effectively take care of themselves because they do not have the tools or the resources to do it. Here's the facts, right? And maybe it's not a fact for you. I don't know. What I've learned too is that you don't have to like a thing for it to be true. But poverty is an indicator, right, of many of the things that we see in our sociological environments. It's true. But in order to solve a lot of those issues, poverty, education, poverty and economic stability, poverty and housing, poverty and the crime rate, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I've been to the police station advocating for my boys or begging for somebody to, release them to me, or how can we, work together so that this does not become a recurring thing. I literally got a call yesterday from a mom who said, Miss KaCey, he's ready now. He is ready. And I'm like, okay, well, before we jump back into this saddle, we need to have a hard conversation, right? Because there's grace and then there is enablement. And learning the difference, right? Learning the difference. Grace is, understand you're learning this thing. You're trying to make a different choice. You are looking at different options. You're not always going to choose the thing that's going to give you the best result, right? But I'm going to give you a little grace to figure it out. Give you a little grace to try it. And then at some point, grace becomes enablement, because look here, I'm not God, right? I love God. I love Jesus. I absolutely do. I'm not ashamed. I will shout it from the rooftop. However, I am not God, which means I don't have a responsibility to you to continue to give you grace over and over and over again. We sing all the time that God's not God of a second chance. He's a God of another chance. And that's all well and fine. But again, I'm not God. I can limit the number of chances that I give to you. And that is when my grace for you runs out. Right? And sometimes grace becomes enablement. And enablement is when I keep looking past all of the other choices that you've made, because you know that I'm going to keep bringing you back into the fold. I'm going to keep giving you another chance. I'm going to keep giving you an opportunity. And yet there's no incentive for you to choose differently for your life, because you know that regardless of what you choose, somebody's going to be standing right there. Now, some people need that and some people do well with it. And then there are others who say, well, dang, I don't have to figure this out, even if it's subconscious. Even if they're doing it subconsciously. Well, I ain't got to figure this thing out. I'm just going to go do what I want to do because Miss KaCey is going to be there. Or whoever is going to still be there. And so I told that mom, I was like, well, let's make sure we have a conversation before we jump back into this, because I don't want my grace to become enablement. And I need for him to understand fully that we are right there at that threshold, right? But I also understand that the choices that he has made have been a direct outcome of the environment that he has been in. Because you can come to a program and get a lot of good stuff. And people can tell you all the right things, and they can hype you up, and they can encourage you, and they can give you the tools for you to motivate yourself. But when you have to go back into an environment that literally tears you down psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, some instances physically, it is a lot to combat, to constantly play that loop over and over and over again in your head of the positive things that you got in a 4-hour program, when you have to go back to this life. And so, yes, poverty is an indicator of many things that we see in our sociological environments. And this is really why I have my degree in sociology. It is because it's not so much how my brain works that fascinates me. It's how I have allowed environmental and external factors, how I've allowed that to shape how I show up in the world. Because a lot of times we have this conversation over nurture versus nature. And there are a lot of instances where nurturing wins out over nature. Because we're conditioned, and then we begin to burn these new neurological pathways, right? That begin to set new characteristics of our personality that may not have been there to begin with, but because of the environment that we find ourselves in, we now become this person. Have we ever, right, said to ourselves, oh, they changed? I know we've said that about somebody, right? Or have we ever said, I used to like them, but I don't anymore? It has nothing to do with how your brain communicates to your emotions. It is some external factor that had to play a part in your relationship with that person, your interaction with that person, how many times you engage with that person, that has now determined whether or not you deem this person changed, or I just don't like them anymore. That's part of our sociological environments. But in order to solve for a lot of these issues that we see, we got to first believe that poverty is something that needs to be solved. Now, I know there's a lot of folks out there that's going to be like, oh, that's not my problem. I got mine. You get yours. Okay. I mean, there's some truth to that, right? I'm not going to sit over here and not win because you choose not to, right? I get that on an individual level, but as a community, y'all, right? As a village, as this extended family that we all have benefited from. And if you tell me you haven't, I will tell you to your face that you are a liar. I will. We all have benefited from something else outside of ourselves. And so if we don't start solving for poverty, understanding that it is going to impact the wealth that we do have, both personally and as a community, we're going to see this problem exacerbated. It's going to become bigger than it already is. And it already seems like it may be too big to solve, right? And so Folks got names for people, right? Whether you're a socialist or not, folks that want to put everything in the pot and divide it up equally and, have the government come and take care of this person and that person. And I think that there is space and room for some of that. But I also think it's about education. It's about access to resources, opportunities, tools, skills. And when you've done that, it is up to that person to take advantage of those things in order for them to do something different with their life. One of the things I'm always fascinated about is that Atlanta great debate between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And I have personal reasons why I'm fascinated with it, right? Because I am a product of the historic Morris Brown College. And while Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois was a professor at Atlanta University, he wrote a lot of his writings and his teachings in what we now call Fountain Hall, which at one point was on the campus of Atlanta University, now a campus of Morris Brown College. And so when I learned that, I wanted to learn as much as I could. And so we have the great debate between the talented 10th and pull them up by your bootstraps, right? Well, what happens when you don't have any bootstraps, right? What happens when you don't have any bootstraps? I believe it was Dr. Martin Luther King who says that it is cruel to expect someone, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's cruel to expect someone to do well and to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they don't even have any boots. Now, that's something to sit on, because we're around here talking about folks had the same opportunities I had. No, they didn't. And for as many opportunities as you had in your life, there's someone that still had more. Oh, but they can go get it just like I got it. Okay, you knew that there was something to go get, right? We can't keep making this assumption that because you got it, that somebody else knows how to go get it too. But again, if we go back to providing knowledge, wisdom, tools, skills, coupled with opportunities, then yes, when they choose not to engage in those things, then you can say, you know what, I did my part. But I think we don't want to accept the fact that there are many people, many young people, many young Black people who don't have the knowledge, the education, the skills, the tools, the resources, or the opportunities. For as much as we talk about them, you want to know how I know? Because for as much as we say that we want to serve a certain population, we still end up serving those who have access to resources. And those children need those opportunities just as much. Hear me clearly. But how is it that we keep getting the same young people in our programs? And then we wonder why there's still a group of them that are doing what they're doing, responding how they respond. Because some of us don't want to ride through some of these neighborhoods. Some of us don't want to get out of our fancy cars and lock the doors to walk these neighborhoods. Some of us are not going to walk into houses that you know are infested with insects and no lights and no water, and you can smell the stench from the door. Most of us, for as much as we talk about community, we're not going into these places. And it's not for everybody to go into. It's not. Everybody is not called for this. Everybody is not built for this. Believe me. But if you're not going to be the one to go, you need to be the one to write a check. And if you're not going to be the one to write a check, you need to at least be the one to say, hey, here's a resource for you. And if you're not going to be one to say, here's a resource for you, at least be one who's not going to speak ill of these children. We first have to understand that poverty is something that needs to be solved. And it requires all parties involved. Full disclaimer, I'm a licensed and ordained minister, but I need the Black church to institute an ethic of care. Get mad at me if you want to. Come for me if you want to. I'm ready for you, okay? Because what I've seen over and over again is a deterioration of Black churches going inward instead of outward. And I don't want to make this a full theological debate, but the church has never been the building. Now, we've had a whole lot of building funds, and we have a bunch of beautiful edifices, right? And vestibules in our cathedrals and in our places of worship, and I'm all for it. But we've been building inward and not outward. When was the last time we saw a church set up shop in the hood and just said, bump the praise team today, bump the fancy dresses and the stiletto heels and the church hats, and let us just go serve community today. This is going to be our worship service today. Right? How many churches don't even open their doors anymore to feed people, to come and get clothes? All the things that we've been commanded to do as a church, we don't do anymore. Now, there are some, of course, there's always an exception, and there's a handful of exceptions, right? But holistically, when you ride down a street, especially in Black communities, how many of those church doors, when you go pull them, are going to be open? All parties are involved. All parties are implicated, okay? Including the Black church. Our city governments and our school systems that are run by Black leadership, they are involved and they are implicated. Our community members and our neighbors and our residents and our leaders involved and implicated, okay? Our families, our grandmamas and granddaddies, our aunties, our uncles, our play cousins, our mamas, our daddies, all involved and implicated. We've got to go back to instituting an ethic of care. And to ethically care for someone, we have to first employ natural caring. Just wanting someone else to be okay because they are first a human being. And then Black folks, caring for them because they look like you. Come on. Because caring for somebody don't mean you have to bring them into your house. Caring for them doesn't mean you got to give them all your money. But caring for them means that I am at least not going to add to the harm that you are already experiencing. For there to be an ethic of care, we got to understand that it's not out of love or personal concern, but y'all, and this is where y'all get mad at me, it is about duty and responsibility. Folks get mad at, oh gosh, I can't think of his character, Troy. They get mad at the character Troy in the August Wilson play Fences. And I thank God, these are the times where I thank God that my mom and my daddy were a little bit older when they had me, because a lot of things related to our culture I was privy to before they became mainstream. So most people were introduced to the play Fences by August Wilson when Denzel, right, played Troy, both on Broadway, and when he made it into a film, right, and Viola Davis starred as his wife. And there's a scene where Troy's son asks his daddy, "Why don't you like me?" And Troy kind of chuckles, "Like you, right? Who says I got to like you?" And folks are like, "Oh my gosh, that's a horrible daddy. How could you say that to your child?" And going off. And I'm like, but y'all didn't listen to the rest of it. You also did not put in context how hard of a life Troy had, because the backstory that you did not get in the movie, unless you go read the play, right, is that Troy had these aspirations to be one of the very first to break into the Negro Baseball League, right? And when he got into the Negro Baseball League, there was an opportunity for him to make it to the major leagues, right? And we all know that Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, but people talk a lot of times about Satchel Paige being an even better player than Jackie Robinson. But somebody had to be the first to go. And a lot of times what they do is assess the whole picture of somebody to determine who they're going to let be the first. Such Page was a little bit older than Jackie Robinson, right? So that played a little bit into it. And so this character, Troy, missed his opportunity because he ended up going to prison. And so here's this Black man living in times where it's real hard for Black folks to make it, right? Everybody in his community celebrated him for being a driver on a garbage truck. Because even during that time, Black folks couldn't do anything but pick up the trash. And for him to be one of the first Blacks in his community to even drive the truck, right, says a whole lot about the expectations that people had on themselves and what success looked like, even when success for many Black communities was still not even the starting block for white communities. So Troy had a hard life, right? Not to say that that's an excuse to treat your children wrong, treat them bad, but I think it's important for us to understand full context. And no, maybe we don't like the tone that Troy used when he was talking to his son and responding to the question, why don't you like me? But Troy said, I don't have to like you. I have to clothe you. I got to feed you, right? I got to take care of you because you are my son, because it's my duty, because it's my responsibility. And too many times we miss what we're supposed to do because we're trying to figure out how we feel about it. You don't have to feel good about the things that you just have to do because you're waiting to feel good about it. I mean, it's going to be very little that gets done because life is hard. And life gets exceptionally hard. Contrary to what people like you to believe, life doesn't always get easier as you get older. You become better at managing the hard stuff that comes to you. So no, maybe we don't like Troy's tone when his child asked him, why don't you like me? But beyond liking you, he honored his duty and his responsibility to not have his child in the street, to not have his child go hungry. So yes, sometimes what we have to do is not going to be out of love or out of personal care and concern, but out of a duty and a responsibility to our community and to our village. And to do that, y'all, we got to be intentional about having a caring attitude. And again, that just stems from being a person who cares. So maybe that's the first question. Do we care about anything other than ourselves and what is personally connected to us? Because I think if we got back to understanding this ethic of care and understood fully how it can impact our young people, then it becomes this positive reinforcement for them and for all of us as they aspire to have experiences, y'all, that aren't determined by their family income bracket. And for many of them, that is poverty. It's tough. It's hard. It ain't pretty. Far from it. Okay. But we have to own it. We have to understand what it is. And then we have to do something about it. I'm going to leave y'all with this because I really do get tired of folks talking about my boys. The American Psychological Association published probably a few years ago, it's become more public knowledge, but they published that the human brain isn't fully developed until 25 years on average. Of course, people develop a little faster than that, a little slower, right? But until 25 is when the human brain is fully developed. And in that, even more specifically, the amygdala, right, is this thing that looks almost like a little fist, and it helps you make decisions. And that is what takes the longest to develop. So what you're doing is taking a child who does not have a fully developed brain that allows them to make decisions well, right? Coupled with them living in poverty, growing up poor, right? And all of the latent effects that come from that, they're going to have impaired brain functioning as they mature towards adulthood. A lot of what we're seeing is biological, well, more physiological, and is more science than it is just they don't want to act right. They just don't want to do right. There's a study that says, right, and it is a study that is, let me think. Michelle Wages, from her book called Culture, Poverty, and Education, What's Happening in Today's Schools. Through her studies and through some of her surveys, what she has determined is that children who were poor at age 9 had greater activity in the amygdala and less activity in the prefrontal cortex at age 24, which is significant because these two regions of the brain play a critical role in how we detect threats, manage stress, and emotions. These same patterns of dysregulation in the brain have been observed in people with depression, anxiety disorders, aggression, and post-traumatic stress disorders. And don't get me started on Dr. Joy and the post-traumatic slave syndrome. That was my little piece added at the end. And then we wonder why poor students, those in poverty, are failing and dropping out of school. Because the ones who do well are the exception, y'all, not the norm. And let's be clear, this is not an indictment on their intelligence. This is only to highlight the mental acrobats that must be conducted in order for them to exhibit and to show the intelligence and creativity that we know our children possess. Poverty does affect the brain mostly because it makes it harder to do the things that most middle class and wealthy families take for granted. And plainly speaking, poverty just makes it hard. So, all right, y'all. I ain't gonna give it all to you today, but I thank you for joining me again on the front porch. Look for us every single Friday, same place you found us here. Take care and make sure most of all, you're caring for others. Bye.